Hello, and welcome to Good News Rhode Island, the show about Rhode Island and all the people and places and events that make Rhode Island a good place to live. And today we're going to be talking to George LaCross, who's here as an expert on Rocky Point, the park that we love to remember. And Sean McCarthy, new to the scene in some ways, is a restorer of all the objects of Rocky Point. And we applaud his work and his notoriety now for being a preserver of our memories, of all the memories of the people who've gone there. There's no one that I meet who doesn't say, "Oh, Rocky Point, I had such a wonderful time there. My parents took me there every summer." I mean, it just seems to be universal. So tell me, George, how did you get involved with Rocky Point, or how did you get involved with entertainment like this?
Well, I first went to Rocky Point in 1962. My grandmother actually took us, and I grew up in East Providence, Rhode Island, actually pretty much down the street from Crescent Park, which is another defunct park that went out and closed in 1978. But Rocky Point was always special because they were always adding new rides. There was more amusements there. And I think pretty much every year from 1962 right to the year it closed, I got down there one way or the other. After I got my driver's license, would drive down there. And it was just a special place by the water. They were always one step ahead of the curve in terms of amusement rides go. They were the first like small park in the country to get a log flume ride, which was something that was pretty much exclusive to theme parks. So it was always a very exciting place, an innovative park, and very enjoyable. So it always will have a special place in my heart.
You are an expert or historian of parks with rides, is that right?
That's
or
correct.
Just general parks?
Yeah. Growing up near a park kind of like stimulated my interest in that, and it's like I got totally involved. Once the internet came on, there was I had a website. I got involved in a lot of different things. When I worked for the Providence Journal, they sent me to Kennywood to do a story, and they sent me to Cedar Point Park and Coney Island and some other parks to do a special feature for the travel section. So I've done a lot of writing, professional writing about amusement parks. And right now, Sean and I we're co-administrators of a Facebook page called Rocky Point Park Remembered, with an exclamation point at the end. It's a private group that people can join, and every day we post different pictures about the park, from its inception in 1847 to currently is the Rocky Point State Park.
I want to come back to the date, but first of all, I want to introduce Sean McCarthy, who's been in his garage, in his basement, and now maybe in more buildings, is collecting a lot of the paraphernalia and the behind-the-scene workings of Rocky Point. So tell us about your work.
So I started out with just collecting at the beginning, and my dad was a body man, a mechanic, and he did a lot of paint work, so I started doing restoration on the side with other smaller pieces. And when I started getting more Rocky Point items, I noticed that they were in decay shape, and the paint was destroyed on them, and they just needed to look a little better for the public eye. So I started doing restorations on the spaceship cars when they first had them, and I have one or two in my collection now. And I started with that small piece because it was a smaller project to work on. I was about probably 14 years old when I started that. And then from there on, I started restoring every single Rocky Point ride I've owned. And it just progressed over the years. More different workmanship I had to put into it, and it got complicated here and there because every ride's different to work on, but it all worked out in the end, and everything came out to be what it is today.
Can you ride these? Do some of them work?
They run on either track, or they used to run on the ride. If they were to be put back on the ride, they'd be rideable, yes. They're still fully functional if they were to be put back on the track that they belong on.
And you bought some track as well, is that right?
Yes, I have some track for other rides, more so other amusement park rides, not Rocky Point rides, no.
And you're collecting other amusement parks then?
Yes, I have
Oh my
tons
gosh.
and tons
Oh,
of
you're going to
rides.
have a museum at some point. You're going to have an
Every
museum.
classic carnival ride or amusement park ride, I have at least one card from each ride for classic
heavens.
amusement parks.
Wow. And I hear you had a show.
I did. It was in late May till June 27th in the Warwick Center for the Arts. I had a whole Rocky Point exhibit which displayed my entire collection. It had tons of private pieces, things that people have never seen before, blueprints for the buildings and benches, multiple different ride pieces and signs and shore dinner hall memorabilia. One of the larger collections of Rocky Point.
I guess. George, so tell us a little bit about the history. What happened in 1847 that meant that people would have a ride? I just find this shocking.
They didn't actually have rides back then. It was founded by a person by the name of William Winslow, and he was with a steamship company, and it was basically a steamship destination for having picnics and so forth. And he bought the property from two sisters who owned, it was part of an estate, I guess they owned the land. And it went through a couple different types of changes over the years. Brian Sprague owned it after, bought it from Winslow, and he kind of like tried to turn it into like an upscale resort by putting in a big observation tower and other things. And then it was owned subsequently by two different steamship companies. Again, back then, this is before automobiles and trolley cars. So you weren't getting there going down, Warwick Neck Avenue to Rocky Point Avenue. There wasn't such a thing then. So you would get there by steamboat. And, rides started coming in around the, late 1800s. There was like steam-powered rides that, like a steam-powered Ferris wheel and carousel, and ultimately roller coasters, which were relatively small. In the late 1800s, they were called Russian toboggans, and they had names like that. And a lot of them came and went. There were quite a few different ones. It was relatively small and easy to dispose of, so they didn't have much of a shelf life. But I'd say probably around in the 1920s, these two brothers purchased it, and they really brought it into a full-fledged amusement park. I mean, they put in some huge wooden coasters. They brought in the Dodgems, like the bumper cars, and really built it up as a competing amusement park at that time. Unfortunately, that was all devastated by the 1938 hurricane.
So there was a big dock in front of it, is that right? I mean, a huge dock.
Yes.
There was no place to eat, but there were plenty of other amusements there.
Well, yeah, they did have, like, that's one of the things that they started doing early on, is having like shore dinners. Like the family members and the people of the owners would prepare shore dinners. With some of the first structures that were actually built there, infrastructures would be shore dinner halls or restaurants and so forth right near the pier. And they kind of like built on from that point into the Midway as we now know it.
Do you have any of the ancient cars, the oldest ones? Doesn't it surprise you? 1847, that's before the Civil War.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't surprise me because most of the amusement parks that you see that are older and the classic ones, they started in the 1800s, the late or early 1800s, and it was just like George said, as more of a shore dinner, and it was more restaurant than ride. It was pretty much like what you consider today a national park to walk your dog. It was similar to that aspect, but it wasn't until later where rides started coming in, and they weren't too fancy either. I mean, they were a little scary. I mean, you can tell that they weren't up to today's code, obviously.
Oh yeah, that's probably one of the reasons it had to close. Isn't that right? Let's talk about it closing. I still find it astounding that something that was so popular with so many people, it doesn't matter who I meet who's been raised here, they know about Rocky Point and they loved it. They had great experiences.
The money.
Yeah. When the park was closed for about 10 years, from 1938 through 1948. In 1948, just before that,
So the stock market crashed.
Well, no, the hurricane had pretty much.
Hurricane.
I mean, some rides actually did survive the hurricane, but most of them were pretty much, because it was all wooden structures and so forth. So they were leveled. Like they had 2 major roller coasters that were completely leveled. The owners didn't want to rebuild it, so the land changed hands a few times, and eventually 3 business partners bought it. And they did a real good job. They got it open for 1948, and automobiles were around, of course, then. The traffic was backed up all the way to Cranston, I guess, for the opening in June. But
that would be how many cars? I mean, that's numbers and numbers of people. That's thousands and thousands of people.
Absolutely.
Backed up traffic for a long time.
Yeah, and there's an article about it in the Journal and some of the amusement park trade publications that I've seen.
It shows a picture of it too.
Yeah, it does.
Of the traffic.
Yeah,
it's the longest way you could think of.
It was crazy, you know. So people just went. I mean, they went gaga over the whole thing, and especially not having the park there for 10 years, and there was rumors it was never going to become an amusement park again and so forth. Right. So ultimately, one of the 3 business partners bought the other 2 out. And this is a key thing about any type of small amusement park thing, is that it's good when one family owns it, okay, because they have complete control over it. And under the ownership of Vincent Furler, he really brought that park up, you know, and kept adding on to it and bringing new rides in and so forth. And he owned it until 1969 and sold it. And the second owner actually was really good too, because he brought the log flume ride in 1971. And again, as I said, that was a rarity. Most of these log flume rides are in big parks like Six Flags, you know, chain and so forth, and they were probably the only small, you know, family-owned park to actually bring in a $1 million price tag flume ride.
Too.
That came later on. That was by a different owner. Yeah. So it went through a succession of owners, but ultimately, without getting
who really cared about it and wanted the public to have it.
Right. Yeah. Pretty much it got into
the more hands that got washed, it got worse.
Yeah. The more people that got involved in it, kind of like just, you know, without getting into detail. It wasn't the fault of the people over on Island or the people that came, that the people patronized it. And I remember going in the last year it was open, and like I was telling you earlier, there were like long lines for the rides, and you had to get there early to get a good, you know, to get into the Shaw Dinner Hall served very quick, but you didn't want to have to wait too much in line, so you got there early for that, and they were doing fine. And it's just ownership, basically, more than anything else.
So there's so many people that have memories. What are your favorite memories, the 2 of you? I mean, I know that you're reconstructing memories.
I live my memories through other people, like George, my mother, father, anybody that went there. That's how I pretty much start. I mean, my memories are more so of the park when it was already caged off and it already had the fences up and half the rides already torn down. That's when I went to go see it. It was pretty much when everything was already decayed and torn down. So that piqued I always had an interest in abandoned places because they're so architecturally satisfying with the artwork. So I always thought that was cool looking over there. And then they tore down the rides in 2007 and there wasn't really much left, but I still used to go there and just look at the piles of rubble and search through them, see if I could find something to bring home. But that's my memories pretty much, is living it through other people and what I hear from stories and stuff.
And how about you? What did you like best?
I'll tell you, the first year I went there, it just seemed surreal. Again, I grew up almost within walking distance of another park, but this place was just, you know, bigger than life to me anyways, you know. And I actually saw them building the Castle of Terror dock ride in the summer of 1962, which ultimately would become the House of Horrors. They changed the name of it in 1970, but they were putting up this great castle, you know, big castle. And
what was it made of? Wood?
It was wood, but they had
sprayed concrete on the outside. It was chicken wire.
Yeah, chicken wire, like the turrets were chicken wire and stucco. I think that type of a scenario. But so one of the construction workers actually gave me a little tour, and I get to walk inside of it. And I mean, you know, at the time I was like 7 years old. It was like, that was pretty. I mean, that was pretty amazing. Yeah. So that's. I have a lot of good memories there, but that one really stands out. I remember that like it was yesterday.
And there's nothing like this now. I mean, to me, Six Flags or whatever isn't the same.
No,
because Rocky Point was more so your classic amusement park. It had all the classic rides and the classic carnival games. Today's stuff's too digital, and the rides are so new that nothing can compare to Rocky Point, and few amusement parks stand today that can relate to Rocky Point. It has that classic amusement park feel to it when other ones don't. It's all the newer, everything's so updated every year. Rocky Point wasn't like that. They had stuff for years and years without changing anything.
So there wasn't this constant code upgrading that
Sometimes
we get into.
Yeah, they kept up with building codes and that kind of thing. But what they didn't do, and they did compete by getting bringing in some good rides. But what they didn't do is what some of the theme parks do now to compete with each other, and they have like the coaster wars, where every theme park has to have the biggest, fastest, record-setting coaster for speed. They didn't get into that game at all. They just basically got rides they knew would, appeal to people. So, like Joan was saying, they brought in a corkscrew coaster, that was, pretty much made in advance.
That was big for its time, too.
That was big for the time.
Not many parks had that coaster at that time.
So they did that, but it wasn't like a record-setting coaster or anything at that time. It was just something that you'd normally find at theme parks, and they found a spot for it, and it was quite the attraction.
Your ongoing interest is that you might someday have a museum, or the two of you might work together to start to do a museum?
Yeah, I hope to have a museum, like half Rocky Point, half other amusement parks that relate to Rocky Point, because the history between every amusement park is different, but when you think about it, everything was hand-painted, hand-done. Every amusement park has their own different way of doing things. So Rocky Point had a very special way of doing theirs, so I hope that to open up a big museum with Rocky Point that has a huge Rocky Point section and recreate some of the original facades of the buildings and stuff like that, so people can relive their childhood memory through all the collections and stuff. It would be really nice to have
How about
that.
a ride?
I'd love to put I have a House of Horrors car, one of the cars from the ride. I'd love to put it back on the track, and I have some props from the ride as well. And I'd like to just build like a small circle thing so people can just get on it and go through a smaller version of it. It would be really cool to get that back on the track and see it ride again, yeah.
Okay, now we need to see your arm,
Yes.
see how dedicated you are. So you have all of Rocky Point history on your arm.
Yes.
The date, 1847 to 1995.
I have the Shore Dinner Hall.
Shore Dinner Hall. The House of Horrors.
The House of Horrors is in the back. And you can see some of the facade of the House of Horrors right there. And then I have some House of Horrors characters, and you can see the archway. But they have all the different things at Rocky Point, including my wrist even has a permanent wristband of Rocky Point. It's for a special event on Gate 3.
And you have the tickets, and here we
Yes.
have tickets here.
And the ticket's on my arm right there for an order of steamers for Rocky Point. So that's how much I like it. If that doesn't prove to you that I love Rocky Point having a tattoo, then I don't know what will.
Well, I hope someday you'll be able to recreate it. I don't know.
I hope so.
If that would be
It's
wonderful.
it'll never open up again as an amusement park. It's impossible with the amount of money it would cost to do it. And it wouldn't be so much Rocky Point anymore because it would be so updated and new. It would be a
Right.
whole different
Right.
look and everything. So I think a museum would capture it the best way. Like you walk into a museum these days about artifacts and stuff, and it's what it was back then. It would show still pictures of them behind the actual artifact itself. So that's what I'm hoping for, really, a really good museum, just specifically for Rocky Point.
Now, is there something we haven't covered about it that you have as a historian?
Well, it's a state park now, and you've been out there, so they have signs up showing where some of the things used to be. Fortunately, the DEM, they retained some of the ride structures, like the Skyliner platform and the towers and pulleys, and the Circle Swing Tower, which dates back to 1906. And the archway that was the entrance from like 1966 right to the end of the park.
How about the merry-go-round?
No, there's no merry-go-round.
There was not.
There was one there.
There was
They had some really good merry-go-rounds there. That and the last one was a 1915 Herschel Sherman, which was menagerie merry-go-round that had all different types of animals on it, and so they did have some classic carousels there over the years. Some of the older readers, or older viewers rather, would know that, like, of the Guarded Park carousel, that came from Rocky Point. It was actually at Rocky Point for quite a while before it was moved to Guarded Park. And then taken out of Guided Park in 1973. So they certainly had their share of classic rides there.
We all have memories, and some of them are of things like amusement parks, and I have to say I've never heard such devotion to an amusement park ever until I've started hearing about Rocky Point. It's a beautiful place to go. The park is still open and available to anyone for having a picnic, and you can see some of the sites where the swimming pool was. That swimming pool, it was very popular, I understand. We hope that as you watch this show that you have your own memories and that you go back to Rocky Point. And I want to thank George LaCross, who's here as the historian, and Sean McCarthly, the Rocky Point enthusiast and restorer. We're here again with Joan Winter, who's here to talk about Rocky Point and all that that place meant to her. And the reason she's here is because we met at Rocky Point, yes, and she started telling us everything she knew from her childhood. And we want to thank you for coming to talk with us.
You're welcome.
So tell me about Rocky Point. Did you live near it?
Well, I grew up at Hoxie Four Corners, and just behind the airport, and it was a great place to play, and everybody loved Rocky Point. If your mom wanted you to be good for the whole week, all she had to do was say, Friday night or Saturday we'll go to Rocky Point, and that was it. You were on your best behavior all week long. So we had a great time. My favorite part of Rocky Point was the pool. I'm a Pisces, a water sign, and I'm always in the water.
Oh, so am I.
Yeah. Well,
I agree. I love the water.
That's why I moved to California for 30 years, by the beach.
Oh.
But the pool was the best. Even after we got an in-ground pool in the backyard, we still begged, can we go to Rocky Point? Can we go to Rocky Point?
Well, because that's where all your friends were, is that right?
Yeah, yeah.
And you also met new kids and probably cute boys and all that kind of thing, too.
Really cute boys, yeah, yeah. Especially when we went to Gorton Junior High School. Oh, those are the days. Uh-huh. We would have sleepovers at our friend's house, and when Mom went to bed, we would sneak out of the porch, and we would go down the street to Rocky Point, pull up the chain link fence, sneak in under the big roller coaster.
Gosh.
Oh, yeah, and then kiss boys underneath the roller coaster.
Gosh. Now, there's some history nobody knows.
Yeah.
Tell me some other stories.
Oh, gosh. I learned to swim at Rocky Point Pool. Well, at least I told everybody I did. That's when you would walk along the bottom, you know, and you'd pretend you were swimming on the top of the water. My mom actually, I actually don't know how long Rocky Point Pool was there, but I know my mom, before I was born, used to go there, take my brothers, and she would dive off the top diving board.
So did you ever try it?
No, okay. I didn't. I dove off the first one, but I never made it to the third one.
So other rides that you liked besides the pool?
I love the centrifugal force one where you stood up, you know, and you would just, everybody always wanted to unhook their belt to see if they would fly out. Ooh. But you couldn't even do it because the centrifugal force would just pull you back in. It was amazing. We just could never figure that out. None of us were scientists.
So it lets you know what it would be like to take off from Earth to go to the moon.
Yeah, that one, and the one where you would go around and you would go in through, up and back, and inside of this thingy. I can't remember what the name of it was, but I always loved it. And whatever amusement park, I'm an amusement park devotee. I've been
now
to...
you are, huh?
Yeah, I've been to Six Flags Magic Mountain in California about 36 times. I've worn out 12-year-olds as an adult. I've had them, please, please, can we go now? No, one more ride. So, and of course the roller coaster is the best.
So you like feeling of being pushed and pulled and out of control of your body?
Out of control is the way to go, yeah. I remember one time my brother Bert, he took me on, what do you call that, the skyline? Where you go up over the park on this you get in this little thing and it takes you up and over the park. Well, he was supposed to take me on that. What he did was he put me on that, and then he sent me all by myself when, God, I don't think I could have been more than 5. I remember it.
Wow.
I was terrified.
So you just held on.
Oh, yeah. Well, it was like a little car high above the park. It was great. You know, I
So
was
maybe
scared,
that
but
got your first lesson in being out of control and liking it.
yeah, yeah. It might have been. So there's so many things about Rocky Point that, you know, just makes you come alive when you think about it.
So you enjoy the memories at this point.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, tell me some other rides.
The House of Horrors.
Haunted house.
Yeah, Haunted House. That was amazing. You know, full-grown adults would be screaming their brains out in there. And
So it really worked.
yeah, yeah, it was. It was great. It was, as a matter of fact, of all the haunted houses and all the amusement parks I've been to all my life, I don't think I ever remember anything as more horrifying than the one at Rocky Point.
What is it? What was about it that was so scary?
They just had really gory things that would pop up, and they would put you in pitch black at one point, and you'd be walking along, and then a bright light would come on, and something would jump out at you, and it was, you couldn't stop laughing and screaming at the same time. It was.
So it was a group event.
Yeah, yeah. My brother and I, when we were there walking the park just recently, it's quite beautiful now. When we were walking the park, he said, remember, you just turn up this road and you knew that you were going to go underneath that arch that said Rocky Point. And the minute you did, you didn't want to be anywhere else in the world. It was like the Olympics.
So it showed you imagination and possibility and, of course, friendship and all of that.
Yeah.
So there was a restaurant there, and I guess it was wonderful.
Yeah, the Shore Hall. Yeah, I actually went to a prom there once when I was in high school. It was really neat. But the Shore Hall made clam cakes, and make no mistake, they're not clam fritters. They're clam cakes to Rhode Islanders, if you're a real Rhode Islander. They made them small and dark and crispy, really crispy. And their chowder, and it was like family style, they just keep bringing you more. And long tables, and the clam chowder was red clam chowder, and nobody has ever made a clam chowder as good as that, for me anyway. I don't even like clam chowder in the red version, the Manhattan. And but theirs I loved.
So what do kids have today that's like Rocky Point, in your opinion?
You know, if they're lucky, they get some carnivals that come into town. Magic Mountain, Six Flags Magic Mountain, all over. We went to, when my friends and I went across country to Rhode Island, girls and I, in 1978, we went to Opryland, and that was fun. But it wasn't Rocky Point.
Near Graceland, is that, where is it?
Yeah, it was in Nashville.
Nashville.
Yeah, or just outside of Nashville. But with Rocky Point, you got the ragged coastline and the big waves and the boats. And at 4th of July, we had some relatives and family friends that had boats. And several times the whole family went out on these boats into the bay, and we would sit there and we'd watch the fireworks. And it was just...
And so they're doubled on the water.
Yeah.
And it's very beautiful.
It was magical. It really was. Your parents could get you to do anything if they said, we'll take you to Rocky Point. You could always, when you were a teenager, you could always wind up kissing some cute boy under the the roller coaster, or get on that thing that went, the high line there that went across up above. And the clam cakes were the best.
So life lessons.
Yeah, don't kiss anybody under the roller coaster too young.
Okay, so there's a good ending statement. Thank you so much for being with us, Joan.